Chief Marty Pieratt. A little bit.
Good evening. All the gory details, the complete report on Pete Rose's gambling prepared by baseball investigator John Dowd is public tonight.
The 225-page summary came out last evening, as we showed you right here on News 5. And now all the documents that support the finding that Pete did bet on baseball, and it says on the Reds, are out in public for the first time.
It's a massive amount of paperwork, as we're going to be showing you. And News 5's Jeff Hirsh has spent the day combing through all of this material to bring you the up-to-now secret story of what baseball has on Pete Rose.
Well, Norma, here it is. I can't hold it all up because it's too heavy, but there's a lot of it here. It has allegations that Pete Rose was deep in debt to bookies and that he sometimes bet $2,000 a game, a direct contradiction to what Pete has been saying.
Well, it feels good to finally be able to look at the camera and say that I never bet on the Cincinnati Reds and I never bet on baseball.
Baseball's greatest hitter says he did not bet on the game he loves. But the 2,000-page-plus report from investigator John Dowd says he did big time. The 9-volume report was given out today. So much evidence it had to be carried in boxes. Investigator Dowd says he has the goods on Pete. Dowd says a handwriting analysis of betting records shows those slips were written by Rose. Here's one of the slips Dowd says shows Rose bet on baseball. Rose's name is in Ron Peters' betting records. Peters from Franklin, Ohio, has claimed to be Rose's principal bookmaker. Telephone records. Rose's phone bills show repeated calls from his house to sports score services, to ballparks, and to people baseball says made bets for Pete. 29 checks to fictitious payees totaling $227,000. Here are some of those checks. This one is to Bob Smith. Baseball says there's no such person, that someone who handled Rose's action used the checks to pay Pete's gambling debts. Rose denied any of that. In his deposition, he said the whole story was a blackmail effort by former friends. Quote, "It kind of seems to me that those fellows were all trying to link gambling to me because they were all in trouble with drugs. I'm talking about Peters, I'm talking about Mike Fry, Tommy Giosa, and Paul Jansen started probably in May of '88, and I can get you 3 or 4 people that he called." Dowd, okay. Rose, blackmail. He said he was going to tell the commissioner I bet on baseball. He was going to kill my wife. He was going to cripple my kids. But in testimony last week, investigator Dowd rejected that.
I have not been convinced of the allegation that it was blackmail.
Or extortion?
That's correct, sir.
Dowd said Rose had his buddies place bets for him. Quote, "In order to protect his stature as one of the most famous baseball players in Major League history, Pete Rose employed middlemen to place bets for him with bookmakers and at the racetrack, and to pay gambling losses and collect gambling winnings, thereby concealing his gambling activity."
And, of course, depending on whether Pete Rose actually has his hearing or not with Bart Giamatti, he could be suspended for a year, he could be suspended for life, or he could be exonerated. That's in the situation if the hearing ever happens with Bart Giamatti.
Okay, so what's the latest on the court battles?
Well, Judge Nadel delayed the hearing. Baseball filed to overturn that. Pete's lawyers have until tomorrow to file their response to that.
So they'll be back in court tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock?
Documents will be. We don't know if a hearing will be. The hearing's probably not tomorrow.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeff. And Jeff will be back with more on the Pete Rose testimony at 6 o'clock. Clyde?
And, of course, this story is endlessly fascinating. News 5 sports director Ken Broo joins us now with the latest on the Pete Watch. Ken?
We have been following this closely, as you know, Clyde, as has everyone else, I think, in this country. Our Thom Brennaman is now down at the ballpark. Let's go live to him. Tom, what's the mood right now?
Mood is very relaxed, Ken, to be completely honest with you. I was in Pete's office for about 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes or so, a little while ago. He's very calm, cool, collected, as the old saying goes. Players, likewise. Music in the clubhouse, kind of kick back, taking it easy, getting ready for tonight's game, and they're more concerned right now about trying to make it 2 wins in a row than they are any of the outside distractions which surround them at this time.
Tom, you and I have done stories with players. We have talked to the players. They all seem pretty upfront in saying this isn't bothering them. But really, this has got to be getting old, I would think.
Well, I would think the thing that certainly gets old, if nothing else, is having hordes of just media everywhere you go and every time you come out to the ballpark. It was interesting. Tom Seaver had some comments on NBC this weekend about the fact that one of the most enjoyable things about playing the game is just the act of looking forward to going to the ballpark and being surrounded with your teammates. It can make it a little bit more difficult when you've got so many dozens of media people hanging around and trying to bring your mind elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay, Tom, thank you. Reds play the Braves tonight, 7:30 down at the big ballpark. Scott Scudder on the mound for the Reds. If we want to get into those mundane things, perhaps we'll wait until 5:50 when sports comes back.
Sounds like a good idea, Ken. Thanks a lot. As Ken said, the waiting and the wondering continues. We'll keep watching the story till it's finally done. Norma?
Well, now that the Pete Rose report is out for everyone to see, we were wondering if your opinions on the Reds manager have changed any. Here's what some of you said today.
I'm allowed to bet. You know, I don't lose my job. Rules are rules, but rules are made to be changed.
Oh, he said he didn't do it. You have to believe him until he's found guilty. That's all I can say.
I think if Pete Rose was gambling on his games that he shouldn't be in sports, so he can gamble by himself.
But he probably did some betting. That's my opinion.
I say good luck, Pete.
We all know the Pete Rose saga has reached around the country, and today the question of gambling and baseball was pitched to the man in the White House. During a news conference today, President Bush made it perfectly clear how he feels about this Pete Rose thing.
I am not going to get into how that matter should be resolved. The baseball and national pastime has sound rules regarding betting on baseball games, and I simply am I'm not going to get into that one.
No more questions about Pete Rose were asked during the news conference.
Well, as you can see, this story has received all kinds of national attention. And since it broke, so has Gamblers Anonymous. Since Pete's story came to light, the organization has received many more calls. News 5's Marty Pieratt shows us how one local member sizes up this crisis in Pete's life.
If you believe this man, Ron Peters, Pete Rose is a man with a gambling addiction. Peters was a bookie, and he says Pete bet on baseball and the Reds while a player and a manager. This is Red. He's a member of Gamblers Anonymous. He says Pete seems like a man with a problem that won't go away.
Now, some compulsive gamblers, they gamble on one thing, you know, maybe the horses or bingo even, but, or the lottery. And, but then there are other compulsive gamblers, like myself at one time, that bet on anything. They need the continual action.
Baseball investigators say Pete was always looking for action from 1985 to 1987. They say betting records show Pete was making bets of up to $2,000 on the Reds and other baseball teams. Further evidence shows that Pete may have been betting on other sports, and his fondness for horse racing is well documented. One gambler says Pete may have been trying to fill a void that was left when he quit playing baseball. And as for allegations that bookmakers may have threatened to burn Pete's home or hurt his family, Red says local bookies wouldn't do that. But if Pete owed big money in a place like New York,
that's a different situation. I don't doubt from talking to friends in New York, it still happens in New York.
Up until now, people with gambling problems have pretty much remained anonymous. But if what the baseball investigator says is true, we will see how one man's gambling can do more than rock a family. It can shake up a whole city. Marty Pieratt, News 5.
A spokesman for Gamblers Anonymous says compulsive gamblers should be treated like anyone else with a disease. They should be cared for. They should be given a second chance.
Now as for the legal battle that is still ahead in Pete's case, here's what happens next. First, you may know lawyers from Major League Baseball have filed an appeal to overturn the temporary restraining order. Pete's lawyers have until tomorrow to respond to that appeal. If the Court of Appeals does not overturn the restraining order, both camps will be back in the courtroom July 6th. When hearings will begin on whether to grant a preliminary injunction and get Giamatti off the Rose case altogether. Difficult to follow, but we're Baseball's report into Pete Rose's alleged gambling is out, and it is massive. We're not just talking about the 225-page report issued to the commissioner. We're talking about all the paperwork gathered in the entire investigation. Here's a quick overview of what the Rose report contains. 9 volumes of documentation. That's more than 2,000 pages. Testimony from witnesses, including Pete Rose himself, phone records, and betting sheets, which investigators say prove Pete Rose bet on baseball, including the Cincinnati Reds. Throughout the report, Pete maintains he did not bet on his own team or any professional baseball games.
Now, we want to stress to you just how detailed this report is. It is 9 volumes, and what's new today is that we now have Pete's actual testimony in the investigation. We've been going through this report all day, and News 5's Jeff Hirsh shows us how Pete denies the strong evidence against him.
The 2,000-page-plus report was carted away by the waiting media this morning. The documents contain what baseball investigator John Dowd says is evidence Pete Rose bet not only on baseball, but on the Reds. There are phone records, checks, and betting sheets, which baseball says are in Pete Rose's handwriting. John Dowd asked Rose about that. Dowd: and again, I want to ask you, Pete, if that is your handwriting, printing. Rose: I've never seen this. Dowd: Pete, I have a handwriting expert that examined your writings in 1987, and he has concluded that's your handwriting. Rose: all I can tell you is what I know. I can't disagree or agree with him. I mean, I never seen that before. Baseball says Rose was thousands of dollars in debt to bookmakers. Rose denied it. I'm going to say this one more time. I don't owe anybody a dime. New York, New England, New Mexico, a dime, nothing. Rose says the whole gambling story was a concoction of some former friends who were trying to blackmail him. Quote, those guys could have a quintet in the last 3 months because they're all singing. They're all singing a lot. They have to sing or they'll be in Sing Sing. And trying to block a hearing before Baseball Commissioner Bart Giamatti, Rose says all he's asking for is an impartial arbitrator to decide, and that Giamatti is prejudiced.
We feel that through this whole investigation that the Commissioner's office is always here looking down at us. All we're trying to do is just the way baseball is played, or football is played, or basketball is played. We want to be on the same field with them where we have a chance.
Rose's lawyers say that now that the report is public, people will be able to read it and understand their claims. The investigation has not been even-handed, and Clyde, that Bart Giamatti's action would have been a foregone conclusion.
In other words, what they're saying then is what we read in here has already been skewed by the prejudice of Bart Giamatti and the people who put this report together for him.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, although I feel like one after having sat through this and read this. But there is what seems to me to be a lot of hearsay in this. In other words, somebody heard something or overheard something or heard somebody on the phone. And the question is, would that be admissible in court as opposed to before the commissioner? And I think that's why Pete Rose's people want to get this into court and out of the commissioner's hands, because they might be able to get some of this evidence excluded.
All right, Jeff, this, as we said earlier, continues to get more complicated.
Not over yet.
You have to read through this.
Right.
All right, thanks a lot. Norma?
Well, some of the key evidence in the gambling report on Pete was supplied by the man who says he was Pete's main bookie, Ron Peters. News 5's Steve Forrest talked with Peters in an exclusive interview. Here in his lawyer's office in Franklin, he showed us betting slips he says are from Pete Rose and described how he took bets from Pete on the phone.
Well, I'd pick up the phone, I'd say hello, and he would say, yeah, this is Pete. So I would proceed to, that's when he called, of course, and I would proceed to give him the line, and then after that, he would proceed to give me who he wanted to bet on.
And the phone call would last very short time?
Very short time, briefly. Right. Strictly business, nothing more.
Did he use Pete? He didn't use a code name or anything?
Even though he had a code number, as everybody else did, his number was 14. He would always call.
That's specific.
Right.
That's for a reason.
So he would remember. So, yeah, he would just call and say, yeah, this is Pete, which he has a very distinct voice anyway, so.
We pick out a betting sheet that you say is a Pete Rose betting sheet.
That's correct.
Chances are pretty good that it was not Pete that you talked to place that bet.
That's right.
Who called?
Well, most likely Jansen, on Pete's behalf. So this is Saturday, July 11th. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 baseball bets from anywhere from $500 to $2,500, one being the Reds for $2,500. And this particular day, he won $5,650.
Did you feel strange taking a bet from Pete Rose, knowing that if he got caught, it could mean the end of his career?
No, he's a big boy. He knew what the results were. It was his decision to make. So I didn't feel like that I should have any remorse taking the bets, no.
Peters will be heading to prison around the middle of next month to serve a 2-year jail term on a drug and tax evasion conviction. Meanwhile, Peters' testimony to baseball investigators is part of the hottest reading in town. The Dayton Daily News published the full text of the baseball commissioner's report in today's edition. As you can see, the lunchtime crowd on Fountain Square was reading every word. Now, this is a copy of the report. It was selling on Fountain Square today for 50 cents a copy. Clyde? The score is now